Okay, so welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to go through some material that's taken me quite a bit of time to prepare. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the entirety of Macbeth, of the whole play, scene by scene, act by act, and I'm going to give you quotations from each scene. I'll do a little bit of analysis as we run through, but the main purpose here is to give you a resource that you can go to get all of your quotations down, and somewhere that you can go where you have the whole arc of the story in one place. So the video will be a little bit longer than some of the other things that I've done. I'm going to try to go through at quite a pace because there's a lot of material to get through. So with that, I will just begin here. So Act 1, Scene 1. So as I'm sure you know, we begin with the witches. There's this quotation here: fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through fog and filthy air. So we have this sense of inversion, that the natural order of events is about to turn on its head. We have this nice linguistic balance as well here. Fair is foul, foul is fair. Obviously a nice bit of wordplay there. Okay, so moving straight on to Scene 2. We are presented with King Duncan and Malcolm. They're conversing, and they get the news about Macbeth and Banquo's victory in battle. So the first thing that we hear about Macbeth is he is this great warrior. It's also important to note that we hear about him first in absentia, so he's not around. And what that does, it allows us to build an image of Macbeth from the other characters' point of view as well, which can be quite useful. It's a strategy that Shakespeare uses quite frequently. He uses it in Romeo and Juliet as well. First we hear about Romeo as his father and another character talking about him. So he uses the same strategy here. So Macbeth disdains fortune, meaning that he just, forget about fortune, I'm brave enough, I can take anything on. And we also get this impression of Macbeth as, pretty brutal, pretty violent. He unseamed him from the nave to the chap. So it means he cut him from his belly button right up to his collar there. Unseamed him. And Duncan is kind of characteristic of a good king. He rewards those who have helped him. So Macbeth has helped to put down this rebel force, and Duncan rewards him. What he has lost, Macbeth has won, and he becomes the Thane of Cawdor. So this new title has been awarded to Macbeth. Macbeth doesn't even know about this yet. Okay, so Scene 3, Macbeth and Banquo are walking, and we have a repetition of this phrase: so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. So again, we have this repetition of the phrase, this idea that things are being turned on their head, the natural order has been inverted. The witches address Macbeth, and so Macbeth encounters the witches at this point, and they tell him, thou shalt be king hereafter. He also gets told, obviously, that he's going to become the Thane of Cawdor as well, and Banquo is told that his children will be kings. So this is news to Macbeth. He wants to find out more, so he begins to plot and he begins to think quite dark thoughts straight away. And there's a quotation from this scene in which he says, my thought, whose murder is yet fantastical. So he uses the phrase murder. He's obviously thinking about murdering the king. So straight away, we have an interesting impression of Macbeth. All it's taken is a few witches to come and give him this weird prediction, and already he's thinking about murdering the king. So it's interesting. He's seen as this heroic soldier, but we know straight away in an aside that he's actually plotting and scheming away already. So this takes us into Scene 4. The king receives Macbeth, and he's really happy to see him, and effusive, calls him a worthiest cousin, and says to him, more is due than more than all I can pay. So, basically, like any king, they need their generals, they need their soldiers and warriors to fight for them, to protect their kingdom and so on. And the idea is like a kind of reciprocal relationship. and so he's obviously very happy with Macbeth. Macbeth's response is interesting. He says, "The service and loyalty I owe in doing pays itself." So he's basically saying here, just to be able to serve you, King Duncan, that is enough payment. Just to be your subject is enough payment for me. So he's kind of really playing up to the role of the perfect subject, the perfect soldier, the perfect general. And that's interesting given that we just heard him in the previous scene maybe plotting or already starting to consider ways in which he might be able to become king himself. So what does this tell us about Macbeth? What characteristic do we kind of find out there? And then this contrasts with Banquo, who basically says very little. He just responds to the king with one line. Macbeth is much more kind of florid in his response. And Duncan describes Macbeth as a peerless kinsman. So he's like, he's a brother and he's peerless. He's just kind of right at the top. So Macbeth, his light is really shining right now as far as the king is concerned. And obviously this quotation is in a sense going to come back to haunt the king. So in scene 5, we have Lady Macbeth receiving the letter. So we begin the scene, she's reading out the letter, and straight away her scheming begins. And she knows her husband. She has an extreme level of social and psychological intelligence, and her analysis is that you have ambition, Macbeth, but you don't have the illness that should attend it. So you don't have that ruthlessness that's going to get you to be able to do what's necessary to get to your position. And she says in this a long passage, which I will analyze more specifically in a different video. Hie thee hither, so that I may pour mine spirits in thine ear. So basically, come back to me, so I can essentially manipulate you. I can verbally manipulate you. And then we have the famous "unsex me here" soliloquy, where she kind of summons some spirits to make her kind of strong and ruthless and vicious and everything. That's a very famous speech. So there's some good quotations there. Good quotations on this page for you. A lot going on in the first 5 scenes. In scene 6, we have Duncan's arrival. Lady Macbeth receives him. Again, she is very polite. She's more than polite. She's the perfect hostess. That's the first 6 scenes. And in Act 7, we have the conversation between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Macbeth describes his own vaulting ambition, so his ambition is personified. It's a nice quotation there, but he actually puts a halt on it. He says, "We shall proceed no further in this business." Lady Macbeth is able to manipulate him. She says, "Art you afeard? Are you afraid?" So it's kind of pushing a button, shall we say, as far as a soldier's concerned. They want to be seen as brave. If you durst do it, then you were a man. The age-old manipulation tactic, which worked in the 1500s, it still works today. Basically saying to a man, if you did this, then you would be a man. Are you a man? So questioning his masculinity. And next quotation, she is this rather bizarre, kind of almost twisted part of the passage where she said if she'd made a promise like Macbeth had, she'd rather kill her own child and dash its brains out than go back on that promise. It's kind of like, wow, she's not only non-maternal, non-feminine, should we say, she's kind of like anti-maternal. So she's the anti-mother, which is very significant in the context of Elizabethan Jacobean drama and the kind of gender dynamics and situation there. Go away, please. This works because by the end of that passage, all Macbeth can really say is, well, what if we fail? he no longer has that strength of conviction that they shouldn't carry on. And he actually says to her, wow, you should only bring forward male children, because she's so kind of stern in her mindset. So Act 1, Scene 7 is a really key scene in terms of the dynamic between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. It's arguably the key scene of the whole play, to be honest with you. And Lady Macbeth is just easily able to psychologically, mentally and emotionally outmaneuver Macbeth, and he basically is defeated and goes and decides essentially to go along with the original plan, which was to murder Duncan. So overall, Act 1 introduces this theme of regicide. It also introduces the occult, the Gothic, the witches, the crow, etc. And there's a really fast speed of character development, and the increase in tension is rapid. So from the beginning of the play to the end of Act 1, the tension just kind of builds almost vertically. It's an amazing act, actually. I think Act 1 and Act 2 are the best acts in the whole play by a margin. And the tension just kind of ratchets up almost vertically like that. Okay, so that is Act 1. How are we doing for time? Okay, so we're 12 minutes in. I'm going to keep going. Okay, so Act 2, Scene 1. Banquo and Macbeth meet. Banquo, basically says to Macbeth, have you been thinking about the witches? And Macbeth's kind of like, no, I think not of them. Obviously, we know we know that is not the case. And when Macbeth is left alone, he has this vision: is this a dagger which I see before me? Again, a famous soliloquy. And is he having some kind of mental breakdown, or is there some kind of spiritual aspect? We never really know, because we have seen the witches. We do see spirits through this play. So we never really know what's happening with this dagger. And the bell tolls, I go, and it is done, the bell invites me. Okay, so in Scene 2, the murder has now taken place. Lady Macbeth comments, had he not resembled my father as he slept, I'd have done it. So it's a poignant comment here. So Duncan resembled her father. So there's a kind of like, this sort of really humanizing comment about Duncan himself. I think it also perhaps shows Lady Macbeth. It's one of those things people say, oh yeah, I would have been there, but I couldn't do it for this reason or that reason. And so when it's really time to take action, it's really time to literally get your hands dirty, bloody in this case, she doesn't do it. She remains at her distance, and she has an excuse for that. But that's, it's characteristic of a manipulative person, frankly. Nature seems to react to the murder, so owls scream, crickets cry. Macbeth is already affected. We have this quotation about sleep. Cawdor shall sleep no more, Macbeth shall sleep no more. So psychologically, he's already saying, what have I done? I'm not going to sleep. Lady Macbeth, at this point, her trajectory in terms of strength and power in the play actually increases. She takes control here, and she says, give me the daggers. Like, she's going to go and wash the daggers. My hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white. So she's shaming him for his reaction at this point. A little water clears us of this deed, terrifying lack of conscience. Just wash the blood off, it's done. We haven't done anything. Scene 3, we hear from the porter, 'twas a rough night, so the weather and winds seem to have reflected this event. And then the news about Duncan's murder is broken, murder and treason. Lady Macbeth, we see in this scene, she's the consummate actress. She's like, what? In our house? And then she passes out. So, we see her again in this kind of incredible, like, sociopathic level of manipulation. She's just been plotting and involved in the murder and the clear up. and now in the aftermath she's able to act so well. It's really disturbing. And Macbeth also plays his part as well, because he goes and kills both of the guards, and he kills them according to his own story, almost in outrage. Who could refrain that had a heart to love? So he just kind of like, doesn't even consider the guards as frankly human beings. He just kills them, and that is his framing for the murder. And Malcolm and Donalbain, Duncan's sons, flee. They flee the scene because obviously they're afraid something's going to happen to them. And then we have this interesting scene between an old man and Ross. We have this statement of the unnatural. This is a recurring theme throughout the first couple of acts. The darkness does the face of earth entomb, sense of darkness encroaching. And this is interesting. Duncan's horses turned wild in nature, broke their stalls. They would make war with mankind, and the horses are reported as having eaten each other. So it's like nature itself has gone wild, and like the horses become sort of cannibalizing creatures. So a highly unnatural state. Nature has been whipped up into something. And Macduff's analysis of the fact that Malcolm and Donalbain have fled makes him suspicious of them. They fled for their own life, but now they've become suspects. Okay, so in this act, the early tension reaches an intense crescendo as Macbeth carries out the murder, and chaos and suspicion ensue. We see the psychological strain that Macbeth has placed himself under by committing the murder. We see Lady Macbeth acting calmly, manipulatively, decisively throughout. The fallback from Duncan's murder is immediate. Malcolm and Donalbain have to flee, and the guards themselves are murdered by Macbeth. Two completely innocent guards, which is something that's never really talked about, but it's almost like, well, the non-speaking parts, well, they were just murdered in just as ruthlessly as Duncan was himself. Okay, how are we doing for time? Okay, so moving on to Act 3. In Act 3, Scene 1, we have the aftermath. Macbeth invites Banquo to the feast, and there's this weird kind of tension between them because there's suspicion between the two. Macbeth is afraid of Banquo's quote-unquote royalty of nature, so his good character, and he would be happy to attack Banquo openly, but they have shared friends and allegiances. It's kind of disturbing how quick Macbeth is to turn on his friend, his comrade from battle, as soon as he gets into power, and the murder of Banquo and Fleance is ordered. So in Scene 2, Macbeth is already kind of struggling to maintain control. We have a quotation here: "The affliction of these terrible dreams that shake us nightly. Full of scorpions is my mind." So he's having bad dreams, he's having terrible thoughts. And Lady Macbeth says, make our faces visible to our hearts, so like draw down a mask. Now this is an interesting part. Lady Macbeth doesn't yet know about the planned murder of Banquo, so some of the kind of tactical maneuvers that Macbeth is about to pull off, Lady Macbeth is not privy to these at this point. So this is like maybe the first time Macbeth kind of starts to go off on his own in a sense through this process. Doesn't involve Lady Macbeth. Scene 3, we have pure action, just the murderers kill Banquo, but Fleance flees, gets away. Scene 4, the murderers report back. The grown serpent lies, the worm has fled. So Banquo is killed, but his son Fleance has got away. Macbeth enters the feast and he sees Banquo's ghost sitting in his chair. Whoa. Ross realizes something is wrong, and he says, His Highness is not well. Lady Macbeth at this point, she really takes control of the proceedings. So she says there, "Sit, my lord is often thus." She's covering for Macbeth, and that's what she's doing in public anyway. And she's kind of like the hostess with the mostess here. She's able to control the court, keep a lid on things, keep things contained. And her address to Macbeth is less compassionate. She basically says, again, she uses this kind of masculine shaming tactic. Are you a man? So he's seeing ghosts, or he's having some kind of an episode, and she says, are you a man? And Macbeth says here, I dare look upon that which may appall the devil. So he's looking at something that is really frightening to him. Lady Macbeth, you look but on a stool. But Macbeth is adamant, if I stand here, I saw him. So the other characters can't see this ghost. Ghost disappears and then also reappears. So this causes Macbeth quite a bit of distress. It goes and then it comes back again. So we have again another interjection of either potentially madness or the occult, the supernatural into the play. In scene 5 we have a new kind of figure that appears, Hecate, who is the kind of overlord of the witches. The witches meet her, and she basically kind of admonishes them and says, this is what Macbeth is going to do. He's going to spurn fate. He's going to scorn death. So we have, more supernatural goings on here. And then in scene 6, we have some speculation from Lennox, first of all. So he believes that Malcolm. So his interpretation is that Malcolm and Donalbain killed Duncan because they fled, and he thinks this suggests their guilt. He also commends Macbeth for how much it really pained him, how it did grieve Macbeth. And then talking about how Macbeth killed the guard straight away, he says, was that not nobly done? Was that not a good thing he did there? So Macduff has fled to England. And there's a new character in here, a lord, who predicts some kind of war upon his return. So in Act 3, overall, we have the aftermath of the murder. Macbeth is beginning to show an exceptionally ruthless streak. This is just starting, ordering the murder of Banquo, a fellow soldier and the man who knows Macbeth better than any other. We see Macbeth's mental state reaching a breaking point. The audience doesn't know whether the ghost was real or was a figment of Duncan's mind. The fact that nobody else can see the spirit suggests that it's probably the latter, and his behaviour is erratic. Lady Macbeth takes control of proceedings. So at this point, the most powerful character in the play, without doubt, is Lady Macbeth. Okay, she is in the background, pulling the strings. She's controlling Macbeth in a sense, keeping him in line in a sense, and then also controlling the court as well. She is the consummate actress. She knows her role, and she attempts to ensure that the court accepts Macbeth as the new king. We're introduced to Hecate for the first time in the play. The supernatural interjects, influences proceedings, and then finally Lennox gives us this impression that public opinion kind of favours Macbeth, as it's Duncan's sons that are the main suspects of the murder. Okay, so moving on now to Act 4. We have the real aftermath of the murder now, as real kind of progression. So Act 4, Scene 1 is set in a cavern. The witches are circled around a cauldron, so we're back with them. This is very much the image of witchcraft that becomes archetypal in our culture. You're going to recognize this rhyme here. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. So there's this little rhyme that they do. Again, they summon Hecate, and Macbeth also comes into this scene, and the witches summon other spirits as well. So a number of other spirits also come as well. So you've got Hecate, the witches, and then a number of other spirits. And one of them says to Macbeth, "None of woman born shall harm Macbeth." Interesting prediction. The third apparition predicts that Macbeth won't be vanquished until Burnham Wood to Dunsinane Hill should come against him. Banquo's ghost appears again, and Macbeth, at the end of the scene, he's got this prediction, none of woman born shall harm him, and he's going to be okay until the woods themselves come against him. and Macbeth resolves, right, I need to kill Macduff, I need to get rid of him, give edge over the sword, his babes, and all unfortunate souls. So basically, kill him and his whole family. So we're seeing this descent of Macbeth into a really ruthless dictator and tyrant. Okay, so scene 2, we are in the Macduff household. Lady Macduff is annoyed that Macduff has left. She says, he loves us not. And Lady Macduff is kind of berating her husband to her son. Your father is dead. Weird thing to say to her son, because he isn't dead at this point. She also says that Macduff was a traitor as well, so she's kind of really upset, and she's bad-mouthing Macduff to her son. Macduff's son is basically brave. He's quite smart as well. You see in the little interaction, he's quite innocent but intelligent. And when the murderers actually arrive at the Macduff household, he confronts them. Thou liest, thou shag-haired villain. So he's like kind of brave, but he's killed. And the end of this scene is something along the lines of, they have killed me, mother, or something like that. So we're left in no doubt by the end of this scene, Macbeth has sunk to almost, it's kind of bottomed out, really. Like, it doesn't really get any lower than this, killing like a small child in the name of what? In the name of megalomania. So we know at this point Macbeth is just beyond, he's beyond any type of redemption at this point. So scene 3, Malcolm and Macduff discuss Macbeth, and Malcolm calls Macbeth treacherous. So Malcolm, the wheels are kind of turning with him, and Macduff is despondent. Malcolm says, I think our country sinks. They both despise Macbeth. Macduff calls him a devil damned in evils, and Malcolm grants Macbeth every sin has a name. Malcolm actually says to Macduff, you're fit to govern. So Malcolm himself says, I'm really not fit to govern. I have too many vices, but you would actually be great. And then in the next scene, scene 3, Act 4, Scene 3, Ross brings the news of the Macduff family death. So for Macduff, he's already upset about the kingdom. Now we're just learning that his family has been murdered. Malcolm, let us make medicines of our great revenge to cure this deadly grief. So Malcolm's like, right, we need to go and get revenge for your family. And Macduff's response is, how can I get revenge on Macbeth? He doesn't have any children. Can't kill his children. He doesn't have any. So it's like, it really hit him in the heart. Malcolm says, dispute it like a man. So we have this kind of masculinity thing coming up here. Call to action, call to violence. And Macduff says, I shall do so, but first I must feel it like as a man. So, he's kind of, he takes a more holistic, a more humane approach towards masculinity, which is like, I have to feel it first, I've just lost my son. So Macduff is this very balanced, very kind of admirable character. And Malcolm says here, Macbeth is ripe for shaking. So we start to get a feeling like there's going to be a revolt against Macbeth, and indeed there is in Act 5. So overall in Act 4 we see the reappearance of the witches, Hecate, and even new spirits that bring these new predictions. Macbeth goes to the witches for guidance and information, thus aligning himself firmly with the occult, witchcraft and dark magic, etc., etc. We also see Macbeth order the brutal murder of Macduff's family. Macduff's character is virtuous and balanced. This contrasts sharply with Macbeth. Macduff is grief-stricken, but he also resolves to seek vengeance on Macbeth. Malcolm is motivated for vengeance, for his own father, obviously, and he's able to console Macduff and point out the right course of action. So Macduff and Malcolm, there's a kind of human allegiance between them. They've both lost family members to Macbeth, and this is like, the final straw. They've realised what a dark, disturbed, tyrannical character he is. So they're going to revolt against him. Okay, so we're doing pretty well for timing here. Act 5, the final act, Scene 1. So the doctor visits Lady Macbeth, and she's obsessively, repeatedly washing her hands here, and she says something and kind of mumbles to himself, who would have thought the old man would have had so much blood in him? So she's kind of revealing what happened here. Who would have thought the old man would have so much blood in him? And the doctor and the gentlewoman overhear Lady Macbeth's confession, and the doctor says, we've heard something we shouldn't have heard. And the doctor's assessment is, this is a disturbance that's only natural. Unnatural deeds do breed unnatural thoughts. So she's acted in this unnatural way, and this is the result. She's kind of losing the plot here. Scene 2, we have Malcolm approaching with his men. So we have a few new characters. Angus, who asserts Macbeth is basically not up to the role of the king. His title, like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief. So he's not fitting as a human being to be a king. The robe is too big for him. And a number of new characters are introduced. We've got Menteith, Angus, and Caithness. They accompany Lennox. There's a sense of reinforcements, and I think there's a sense of new energy in the play. It's one of the things that Shakespeare does successfully at times, is introduces new characters to keep the energy up in the play, and so that works quite well here. Scene 3, we have Macbeth kind of unconcerned at the beginning. He knows there's probably going to be some plotting against him, but he's unconcerned and he feels invincible. So there's this sense of hubris. And a guard comes to him and says, "Sir, there's 10,000 soldiers approaching." And Macbeth, first of all, doesn't believe him, but in any case, he gets kind of armed and goes, "Right, I'm basically going to go out on my shield. I'll fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked." So he's very kind of bullish about this. And when he speaks to the doctor, the doctor mentions the troubles Lady Macbeth is having, and he says, can't you just erase her memory with some sweet oblivious antidote? So can't you just give her some pills so her memory is kind of cancelled? So Lady Macbeth at this point, she has been in a precipitous decline from being at kind of peak level influence. She's suddenly really basically no longer a self-sustaining character. Scene 4, the approaching army uses the woods as a disguise, and Macduff and Malcolm approach. Scene 5, Macbeth hears a cry. It doesn't faze him. It turns out that cry was Lady Macbeth dying, killing herself. Macbeth's response is pretty, laconic. It's just, she would have died hereafter, so she's going to die anyway. And he goes on to express his famous nihilistic view on life. So at this point we have this real kind of darkening and closing of his heart, and he just had this very nihilistic view on everything, which is unsurprising given his actions. Life's but a walking shadow, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So it's total nihilism. There's no meaning. It's all just a tale told by an idiot, sound and fury. It doesn't mean anything. And a servant comes in and says that the woods have begun to move, and Macbeth recalls this prediction of one of the spirits who said, the woods are going to rise up against him. So there's this prediction, starts to play on his mind. Scene 6, Malcolm and Macduff are ready to attack. The trumpet sound is quite a short scene, and it's just a precursor. It just builds a bit of energy and dynamism for this final few scenes. Scene 7, young Cyborg is the first to attack Macbeth. Macbeth clings to this prophecy from the spirits, about a man of no man of mother born will harm Macbeth. And he says to himself, who is it that is not of woman born? Everyone's born of a woman, obviously. And so he's able to defeat young Cyborg. Macduff enters. He's looking for revenge as well for his wife and children. And then Cyborg and Malcolm also enter the battle. Eventually Macduff finds Macbeth, and Macbeth says to him, I bear a charmed life, I mustn't yield to one of woman born. And Macduff says to him, Despair thy charm, Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. So in a way he was a process of caesarean, like the mother died or couldn't deliver the child and he was taken out. So technically he wasn't born in the traditional sense. And Macbeth, he knows this prophecy and he just kind of loses the will to fight on. Now in scene 8, we have Malcolm, Ross and Cyborg entering. Cyborg learning of his son's death. Ross, like a man, he died, and we've got this whole masculinity thing. There's an interesting question about male disposability and this kind of like masculine code of honor and how it's effectively weaponized against men in this play and in frankly in society as a whole. That's an interesting theme that seems to come out of this play. Macduff returns with Macbeth's head, so Macduff executed Macbeth. We don't actually see it on the stage, and he says, "Hail King of Scotland," in reference to Malcolm. Malcolm immediately wants to try to unite the kingdom. "My thane's kinsmen henceforth be earls," so like you're all kind of promoted. Calling home our exiled friends abroad, so people who are abroad come back. And there's this famous analysis of Macbeth, this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen. So they're both dead at this point, and the play comes to an end. So in Act 5, the spirit predictions are again proven accurate. There's a question raised over the concept of destiny because Macbeth believes the predictions so much, they become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. But then again, they have all come true, and his faith in them increases as well. Macduff gets his revenge, and the kingdom is again set right as Malcolm is installed on the throne. However, much death, destruction and chaos has been the result of the murder of Duncan. So for this act of treason, this act of regicide, we've basically had extreme consequences: murder, civil war, children being killed, innocent people being slaughtered, madness, suicide. Every disaster that could kind of befall humanity has come after this act. So that is the whole play. There are a ton of quotations in there. I don't know how many there were in total. There's probably around 50 quotations, and each one is linked to a specific scene. So I think this is going to be a really useful video. And obviously, if you need to go back to any particular scene, you can do that now. You've got a summary and a list of quotes from each and every scene. So I'm confident this is going to be useful to some people. Macbeth is a big text on the GCSE and the IGCSE as well. So next up, we're going to look at individual characters and a few passages from the play itself. We're going to zoom in and look at them a little bit more closely.